This is the beginning of part 2 of our module on restaurant industry analysis, which examines the approach of the principal credit rating agencies to assessing the credit risk of global restaurants, reviews the principal publications by S&P and Moody's on this subject, illustrates the more critical calculations they require, and applies their guidelines to the assessment of Starbucks to drive home in the clearest manner the key learning points. We remind you that Part 2 contains 2 chapters. Chapter 3, which describes S&P's approach to restaurant ratings, compares it to Moody's, and comments on the pros and cons of each. And Chapter 4, which applies the Moody's scoring approach to Starbucks to derive its estimated credit rating. This Chapter 3 describes S&P's approach to restaurant credit ratings, compares it to Moody's, and comments on the pros and cons of each. Unlike Moody's, S&P avoids the heavy use of quantitative risk factors and provides instead a general description of industry characteristics and risk considerations. S&P begins by examining in succession the restaurant company's business risk and financial risk, breaking each down into a series of subtopics illustrated in the charts about to appear. Business risk is subdivided into 4 categories: country and macroeconomic risk, industry risk with its own subdivisions, competitive position with its own subdivisions again, including management, and profitability/peer comparison. S&P evaluates each category and determines one of 6 scores for overall business risk. Excellent, which can be understood to earn the company a rating of either AA or AAA. Strong, which corresponds to single A. Satisfactory, equivalent to BBB. Weak, double B. And vulnerable, which earns the company either a single B or a triple C. We note that these categories are not the same across all industry groups for which Moody's has published a ratings methodology, where the category fair makes an appearance or 2 here and there. Country risk, according to S&P, plays a critical role in determining all ratings on companies in a given national domicile. Sovereign-related stress can have an overwhelming effect on company creditworthiness, both directly and indirectly. However, when rating a corporation, S&P looks beyond the sovereign rating to evaluate the specific economic or country risks that may affect the entity's creditworthiness. These include the effect of government policies and other country risk factors on the obligor's business and financial environments, and the obligor's ability to insulate itself from these risks. The industry risk section in the S&P report is perhaps the most instructive. The rating agency focuses on a comparison of the restaurant industry's risk profile with that of other industries, emphasizing that while risk characteristic categories are broadly similar across industries, the effect of these factors on credit risk can vary markedly among industries. The tables we are about to show are reproduced from the S&P 1 document and provide a comprehensive summary of the restaurant industry risk characteristics in comparison to those of the retail, auto, and airline industries. The first of these tables breaks down industry dynamics and competitive environment into 9 subcharacteristics listed in the first column. There is no need to comment in detail on each one of these, but note in particular, perhaps surprisingly, S&P's view that demographic trends and product obsolescence are high risk factors for restaurants, despite its recognition elsewhere in this report that eating out increases as societies become wealthier and adopt more Western styles of life. And the fact that while any one item or category of items served in restaurants may lose favor for any number of reasons, food and drink overall are perhaps the last consumer item that could ever become obsolescent. The fact that ease of entry, product quality, competition, and in most cases pricing and flexibility are high or medium-high risk characteristics cannot be denied. But whether the restaurant industry is at substantially greater risk of disintermediation and substitution than, for example, the retail sector, again depends on what S&P means exactly. Food and drink cannot be substituted by any other competing item, but people can choose to cook and drink at home, while they still must, in the great majority of cases, purchase their shirts and shampoos in retail stores. These observations are summarized for your convenience on the slide appearing now. This next table breaks down growth and profitability into 3 subcharacteristics listed in the first column. Not surprisingly, profit margin pressure and earnings volatility score poorly for the restaurant sector, but the high ranking for the overall growth outlook again seems strange to us given the favorable demographic and lifestyle trends acknowledged in rapidly developed economies such as China and India. We break down the third part of the table, addressing operating considerations and costs, into 2 subparts due to space considerations. You will note in this first subpart the low exposure to technological risk and research and development costs, which do not seem controversial. You will also note the high ranking for cost efficiency and pressures, operating leverage, energy and raw material cost sensitivity, and labor costs, all of which we have commented upon already in the previous chapters. Regarding the risks of labor inflexibility and unrest, and of pension costs and contingents, you will observe a stark contrast between the restaurant industry and the auto and airline industries, reflecting the far greater unionization level in these latter industries, as well presumably as the greater bargaining power of their labor forces, resulting from their greater and more specialized skill level than that of restaurant workers. The same applies, but for different reasons, to the risk of environmental impacts and costs, naturally quite low for food and beverage, and incidentally for retail, but much higher for airlines and autos. This second subpart of the section on operating considerations and costs is interesting in a number of ways. The risk of marketing costs, ranked in the medium category by S&P, falls somewhere between its corresponding rankings for autos and for airlines. We do not doubt that car sales need more marketing than food and beverage. but whether Big Macs and deep dish pizzas are marketed with any lesser zeal than round-trip tickets to Paris is something we are not sure about. The medium to high ranking for risk management, higher than for any of the three other industries appearing in this table, is also questionable in our opinion, unless it is predicated on a very broad interpretation of what risk management means. The rating agencies elsewhere argue that restaurants can do little to hedge or mitigate the price risk of most of their raw materials and labor costs. In contrast to airlines and auto manufacturers, who have access to hedging instruments for fuel and for various industrial metals. If the explanation is that risk management for restaurants also includes managing the risk of customer food poisoning and similar health issues, we would argue that these are better captured by the event risk and the litigation/legal risk categories appearing further down in the table. Similarly puzzling is the ranking for event risk sensitivity in the low to medium category, in contrast to Moody's, which emphasizes just how serious are the risks of customer food poisoning and similar health-related hazards. As with the other three industries, customer concentration risk is clearly a non-issue here, while supplier concentration risk is a little more significant, as you would expect. Asset quality and upkeep, in reference to the need to refurbish locations frequently and reinvent themes that become outdated, and the sensitivity of the industry to fads and changing tastes and preferences, have all been discussed previously. The many observations we just made are summarized for you on the following 3 slides. This next table addresses capital and financing characteristics, which it breaks down into the 3 subcategories you see in the first column. High capital intensity causes no surprise, although the franchise-based model is often selected precisely on account of its diminished capital requirements. Low to medium borrowing requirements, in our mind, are difficult to reconcile with the high capital intensity of the industry, and with the reality that several restaurant credit ratings are weak, partly on account of the high debt levels of the companies in question. Indeed, to us it is difficult to reconcile, when comparing the restaurant and retail sectors, S&P's judgment that the former is the more capital intensive, yet has the lower borrowing requirement. Furthering our argument is the fact that for all 3 industries, the rankings for capital intensity and borrowing requirement are identical. That they can diverge so much in the case of the restaurant industry becomes especially puzzling. Finally, the medium-level sensitivity to interest rates is similarly debatable, at least if we accept S&P's preceding viewpoint that borrowing requirements are low, and the reality that interest rates in mature economies are so much less volatile nowadays than commodity prices and foreign exchange rates. This final part of the table, addressing government, regulatory, and legal environment, is broken down into the three subcategories you see in the first column. Low regulatory risk presumably means not that the industry is lightly regulated, but that compliance with relevant regulation is easy. The medium ranking for litigation risk is certainly justifiable given the realities of food hazards, and also the more esoteric risks like the famous lawsuit against McDonald's for serving coffee that burned the customer severely. We provide a summary now by repeating that both rating agencies view negatively the restaurant sector's high raw material, energy, and labor cost exposures, high capital intensity and operating leverage, intensive competition and frequency of discounting promotions, and exposure to fashion risk, and also how these are mitigated by the rising tendency to eat out and increasing disposable incomes for aging baby boomers, along with the industry's decent track record in recent times of developing new concepts and menu items and focusing on value and special dietary needs to offset some of the price pressure from competitors. S&P's methodology turns next to a description of the company-specific analysis. S&P lists market position, diversification, operating efficiency, strategy, risk appetite, and track record of management, and finally ownership and governance as the 5 key factors that determine a restaurant company's competitive position. More specifically, it lists the following factors as the primary drivers of business success in the restaurant industry, many of which we have seen already, before proceeding to add a little commentary on each. Size, strong market share and position. Geographic diversity of earnings, regionally and/or internationally. Presence in higher growth food markets and regions. Facilities in good locations, new store openings and remodeling and upkeep. Quality and appeal of food and menu. Speed and service quality. Value, presumably meaning value for money. Cost control and operating efficiency. Well-established franchise with strong retail brand recognition and loyalty. Effective marketing programs. And finally, growth through new menus and concepts and overseas expansion, as well as franchising. The principal comments S&P makes here are summarized next. 1. With consumers increasingly viewing restaurants as substitutes for home cooking, rather than a place to visit on occasion, restaurants must either differentiate themselves or be competitively priced, especially on basic items where consumers have so many alternatives. 2. Price discounting, however, hurts profitability and may not even result in permanent market share gains. 3. Easily accessible locations are necessary to capture customers. McDonald's excellent market penetration, for example, makes it easy for customers to find a restaurant. 4. Employee turnover is a major operational and cost consideration and can be very high, especially for quick service restaurants, for whom a key challenge and cost is to constantly train new employees while preventing a drop in service standards. 5. Some restaurants have established computerized training programs to smooth this transition and keep a lid on costs. 6. As usual, S&P places substantial emphasis on the competence of management, somewhat in contrast to Moody's, which, as we saw, does not include management among its quantitative factors at all. S&P evaluates the credibility and realism of management strategy, plans and projections, its operating and financial track records, and its appetite for assuming business and financial risks, principally by means of the following considerations: maximizing property cash flow, marketing and brand management, operating efficiency and cost control, food and customer service quality, labor relations and employee training, asset, property and project management, value creation with an appealing price, quality and dining experience, with attractive premises and other amenities that build client satisfaction and loyalty. Local government, zoning board, and regulatory relations management, including maintaining sanitary premises and avoiding food poisoning and other health hazards. And finally, the ability to obtain access to debt capital necessary to create and maintain property portfolio and successfully manage leverage levels. Comment number 7. S&P emphasizes in particular a company's ability to strengthen through programs to improve productivity and find new product items and geographic growth opportunities, and invest in technologies, premises, and staff training. 8. Profitable execution of acquisitions is a key to success, especially if the mix of debt and equity is appropriate and given reasonable purchase multiples. Benefits from these include improved growth prospects, improved efficiencies and economies of scale, and better bargaining power with suppliers. Finally, S&P stresses the relevance of franchising for rapid expansion of a restaurant's concept and brand without major capital expenditure, typically resulting in greater returns on asset and higher incremental margins. For example, McDonald's, which franchises 70 to 80% of its units, has operating margins of around 30% compared to the more typical 17% or so for a restaurant operator. Franchising also mitigates rising costs such as food, labor, and utilities because companies receive franchise royalty based on a percentage of sales. Important drawbacks of the franchising strategy, however, include the loss of control over operations, the difficulty of enforcing strictly the company's policies and procedures, and the greater time it takes to implement changes. Franchise restaurants that are not kept in good condition reflect badly on the entire chain. Witness the financial and relationship distress suffered by Burger King, a 90% franchise system, a few years ago, and the extensive restructuring program this necessitated. Franchising works best, understandably enough, in simple, cost-efficient business models where standardization is straightforward. The greater the commoditized nature of the business, the more successful the franchising model. S&P completes this section of its analysis by examining profitability and peer comparisons using the following 4 ratios: sales and operating profits per store compared with peers, pre-tax, pre-interest return on capital, operating income plus depreciation amortization as a percentage of sales, and finally gross margin in aggregate and per store. These various profitability measures are adjusted in a manner similar to Moody's but not identical to it for off-balance sheet leases and pension and other post-retirement liabilities. the first of which, as we saw, can be quite material for certain restaurants. S&P comments that return on capital measures the underlying efficiency of invested assets and can be a leading indicator of long-term survival, and that the store profitability ratio is indifferent to the mix of debt and equity, which facilitates comparisons across companies. The second major part of S&P's analysis focuses on financial risk, broken down into accounting characteristics, financial governance and policies and risk tolerance, cash flow adequacy, capital structure and leverage, and liquidity and short-term factors. These generate a score for overall financial risk, ranging from minimal, corresponding to a rating of AAA or AA for this measure, modest, which is equivalent to single A, intermediate, worth a triple B, aggressive, which earns the company a double B, and finally, highly leveraged, which warrants a single B. For S&P, the major goal of financial risk analysis is to determine the quality of cash resources from operations and other sources to service debt and other financial liabilities based on an examination of the liability structure, including the mix of senior and subordinated debt, fixed versus floating, and maturity structure. Regarding accounting adjustments, we have noted already that operating leases are particularly significant for many restaurants and are treated as debt-like liabilities by S&P, which capitalizes and adds to the balance sheet the present value of non-cancelable minimum operating lease obligations and allocates periodic rent payments to interest and depreciation components in a manner similar to Moody's. More generally, S&P seeks to determine whether the ratios and statistics derived from the published financials adequately measure a company's performance and position relative to peers within and outside the industry group. In so doing, it focuses especially on the following areas: analytical adjustments and areas of potential concern, significant transactions and notable events that have accounting implications, significant accounting and financial reporting policies and their underlying assumptions, and finally, a history of non-operating results and extraordinary charges or adjustments and their underlying accounting treatment, disclosure, and explanation. The assessment of financial governance and risk tolerance includes a review of management use of new debt financing and particularly aggressively leveraged deals relative to the burden debt service will place on the company's cash flow and other liquid sources of funding. Overly aggressive capital structures can leave very little capacity to absorb unexpected negative developments and will certainly leave little capacity for future strategic investments and to withstand inevitable downturns. Cash flow analysis is one of the most critical elements of all credit rating decisions. There is usually a strong relationship between cash flow and profitability, but many transactions and accounting entries affect one and not the other. Analysis of cash flow patterns can reveal debt servicing capability that is stronger or weaker than might be apparent just from earnings. Because there are calls on cash other than for repaying debt, it is important to know the extent to which those requirements will allow cash to be used for debt service or lead to greater need for borrowing. The most important cash flow ratios S&P examines for restaurants are the following: EBITDA minus capital expenditures minus common and preferred dividends divided by debt. EBITDA minus capex minus common and preferred dividends divided by total debt plus the present value of operating leases, which measures how much total debt is covered by discretionary cash flow after adjustment for future operating lease expense. Funds from operations divided by total debt adjusted for off-balance sheet liabilities, debt to EBITDA, and finally EBITDA to interest. Indicators of leverage include total debt plus the PV of operating leases divided by EBITDA, total debt to total debt plus equity, total debt plus the off-balance sheet liabilities divided by total debt plus off-balance sheet liabilities plus equity, and finally total debt divided by total debt plus the market value of equity. In all cases, total debt meaning after adjustment for operating leases. For S&P, a company's assets and related cash flow mix are critical determinants of the appropriate leverage for a given rating level. With assets and brands that produce strong cash flow and have clear marketability, justifying a higher level of debt than assets with weaker cash generation and market value characteristics. The final component of S&P's financial risk analysis addresses liquidity and short-term factors, particularly for speculative grade issuers for whom the short-term horizon can be so critical in terms of event risk and susceptibility to changes in business conditions. Liquidity analysis, and that of financial flexibility more generally, begins with operating cash flow and cash on hand, then examines other actual and contingent sources and uses of funds that could provide or drain cash under given circumstances. Companies in a growth phase are often pressured for capital, with access to external finance such as bank lines becoming especially critical. Key factors S&P examines include the total amount of facilities, whether they are contractually committed, facility expiration dates, current and expected usage and estimated availability, the quality of the bank group and evidence of support or lack of support by this group, and finally, covenant and trigger analysis. Financial covenant analysis is critical for speculative grade credits, including historical covenant compliance and expected future compliance and covenant headroom levels. Entities that have already tripped or are expected to trip financial covenants are subject to special scrutiny and are reviewed for their ability to obtain waivers or modifications to covenants. Before concluding this examination of the S&P methodology, we draw your attention to the matrix about to appear, extracted from the S&P 1 document, which is not included in all other S&P methodologies. In this matrix, S&P combines the company's individual business and financial risk ratings into an overall credit rating, approximately via a sort of averaging process in which, for example, a single A rating for business risk coupled with a double B financial risk rating produce a triple B minus overall rating, and so on. Note, however, that two identical weak ratings for the two categories can result in a lower overall rating, such as the single B minus that results from the combination of two single Bs. S&P emphasizes in a footnote, however, that these outcomes are shown for guidance purposes only, with other qualitative and quantitative factors potentially overriding these measures. This completes this chapter 3.